Thank you, Mark, and Todd and Art. And since I am paying for the microphone, I'm going to ask the first question. The and this, I guess, maybe is more for Todd than for anybody else. There's always been this sense, or a a response a lot of people have made to this issue of smuggling organizations bringing terrorists, potential terrorists, is that they're in it for the money, and if they actually do bring a terrorist across the border, that potentially is bad for business because then we crack down. It makes superficial sense, but have you considered that? What's sort of your take on that? Yeah,
So
Todd.
I can take that.
Yeah, please.
I guess a quick answer to that would be that if the U.S. government is not yet doing extreme vetting, neither are the smugglers. Oftentimes, I would say that they don't know who they're bringing in. However, as in the case of Dakhani, Mahmoud Dakhani, sometimes they do know. There was a smuggling prosecution here in the District of Columbia, I want to say 3 years ago, of a special interest alien smuggler by the name of Irfan ul Haq. He was prolific in bringing Pakistanis over the Mexico-Texas border until they finally got him and picked him up at the Miami airport a few years ago. What was interesting about that case is that ICE HSI got an informant into and close to that particular smuggler while he was overseas and planted a story: we would like you to move some Pakistani Taliban terrorists who are blacklisted into the United States for us. And ul Haq's response was, sure, I have no problem with that. I don't care if they come in, mop floors, or blow something up. So in some cases, they're about the money. In other cases, they just don't care. There have been a number of SIA smugglers who, after 9/11, got out of the business because they felt the heat would come on.
But there's plenty that are willing to do that as well. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, you would build it into your business model to the degree that there was any specific danger. One, and two, the same response could be given for, drug traffickers. Smugglers don't care what they run. They don't care if it's people. They don't care if it's drugs. They don't care if it's, some sort of weapon of mass destruction. I don't want to be dramatic about it, but, no one really has an ideal picture of a smuggler, but in reality, they're worse than you could possibly imagine. They live on the edges of the law. They really don't care, and the fact is, if the heat comes on them, well, they're good at moving people. They can change venue themselves and go someplace else with the money that they've made. So
Interesting. Anyone? Yeah, wait for the mic.
Thanks. Peggy Archowski. I'm congressional correspondent with the Hispanic Outlook. I'm wondering, this gets wonky, but I know there's a difference between applying for refugee status, applying for asylees, and as I understand it, the basic difference is refugees supposedly are supposed to seek refuge in the first safe country they come to. So therefore, if they coming through Mexico, why would we accept a refugee in the United States? But I guess asylees don't have that restriction. They can cross through dozens of countries and then come to the United States and accept asylum. Is that true, or is there any distinctions made? And the same with the temporary protective status. Do asylees get temporary protective status, and then, is there any enforcement to the temporary part?
it's actually a very good question, and part of the reason why, if you read a press report, in fact, former Director James Comey of the FBI in testimony last week noted that 300 refugees were being tracked in connection with terrorist ties. You'll often see the words refugee and asylee used interchangeably, and part of that arises from the Immigration and Nationality Act itself. The definition of asylee is a person who satisfies the refugee definition. But an easy way to separate the two is to apply for asylum, you have to be in the United States. You can enter legally, you can enter illegally, you can, pass credible fear and be placed into asylum or given the opportunity to apply for asylum. Refugees, by definition, are all abroad. They're all, they go through a screening by the UN, and then they get interviewed by USCIS officers over there before they come. And unfortunately, because of the blurring in the Immigration and Nationality Act between the two phrases and in the popular imagination, I think that when we had a big discussion, I was on House Oversight last year when we were having the discussion following the Bataclan massacre about refugees coming from certain countries, that people blur the two things in their minds. A crucial takeaway that I hope that you get from this presentation is, as Todd said, there's a vetting process for refugees, and we can always say no. We don't really know about you. You're going to have to stay in a camp in Jordan. Asylees self-select to come to the United States. By the time that by the time that they apply for asylum, they're already here, and we have to actively move them out of the United States. And for that reason, this presents a much larger vulnerability.
Todd?
Yeah, I would also just add that to a quick point about the posture that countries that are transit countries like Mexico or Panama take toward SIA, special interest alien migrants that are moving through their territory. Special interest aliens is the government vernacular for that, not mine. It's a subcategory of other than Mexican OTMs. That's another one, but it's all post 9/11 vernacular. But in any case, there are two things going on there: that the transit countries through which they're moving are not interested in keeping them typically. And those who are moving through those countries, although they're perfectly safe, are not interested in staying. They just want to move through. And so typically what will happen is when these migrants are apprehended in Mexico, they'll be given food, water, medical attention, taken pretty good care of, and then they'll be provided after 2 or 3 weeks with a legal document that allows them to be in the country for 2 or 3 weeks with status. That gives them just enough time to make their way to an exit, which is almost invariably a northern exit. And so that's the case in Panama, Costa Rica, and most particularly Mexico. And often they'll, find the Mexican immigration folks will take them straight to the border in a taxi.
Yeah, this is commonly called catch, rest, and release, and it happens throughout the smuggling routes. Catch, rest, and release. You'll get detained. You'll be placed in detention in, say, Panama for 10 days. They'll, you get a place to stay. You get fed. You get a exit visa, and you're allowed to leave the country, go wherever you want, and it's not a big surprise of where they're going. The best example of this is found in the United States Department of State Country Report on Human Rights Practices for Colombia, and it contains an amazing statement. It's a little long, so please bear with me, not too long. Quote, the government of Colombia reported a continuing rise in the smuggling of migrants from outside the region through Colombia en route to the United States and Canada. According to UNHCR and Colombian migration officials, most of the undocumented migrants were Cubans and Haitians, followed by Africans and Asians, and most entered through Ecuador, Venezuela, and Brazil. While the government generally provided access to the asylum system for such persons who requested international protection, many abandoned their applications and continued on the migration route. To underscore Todd's point, this sort of establishes the fact that safety isn't the primary driving goal for these individuals. There's a saying that a drowning man will reach for the point of a sword. These individuals in Colombia who are making their applications have the opportunity to resettle in Colombia and be perfectly safe from whatever the fear that they have. But they're not taking the opportunity because the goal is coming to the United States itself.
In some cases, that's family reunification has to do with that, economic opportunity. It's perceived that this is a better destination. So, and one other last point on that, if I.
Sure.
that in some cases, the SIA smugglers, the kingpin ringleaders, have embroidered into their operation, into their business model, Mexico's accommodation. So it's required in some cases. They require their clients to stay there, partly because to go through that, partly because they're going to get a legal document in the South, and they can kind of take their time. They don't have to. Their risk is lowered. Their trouble is lowered. They're not having to pay as much bribe money, et cetera. So they want their clients to stay in these places for a while and get that legal doc.
This does suggest something that's been a bugaboo of mine for years, which is that most of this problem is because we are allowing people who aren't coming immediately from the country they're being persecuted in to claim asylum in the United States. And the Refugee Convention, Article 31 of the Refugee Convention, specifically says that illegal immigrant must be considered for asylum. Can't just be turned down because he's illegal, only so long as he comes directly from the country where he's being persecuted. And so it seems to me that part of the policy issue to deal with, whether it's people not showing up for court or whether it's terrorists trying to sneak in, is to basically try to get Mexico and all the airports from Europe where people also fly in from, agreements with them so that if somebody comes through those routes, we don't even consider their asylum claims. In other words, it's like you may be the most persecuted person on the planet, but you have no right to apply for that here because you should have done it before. And my question is, what can we do to move in that direction? Because obviously we'd have to get Mexico to agree to take those people back because they're only going to take their own citizens back otherwise.
It's an interesting question for a couple of reasons. One, under current law, asylum is actually a discretionary form of relief, which is a little odd. If you have a well-founded fear of persecution on account of your race, religion, nationality, membership in a particular social group, or political opinion, you can be granted asylum. However, the judge or the asylum officer has to grant that in the exercise of discretion, and generally, the persecution itself is enough to overcome that bar. There are rare instances, however, where an individual will pass through a number of countries that grant asylum, and the judge will say, or the asylum officer will say, I'm going to deny this claim in the exercise of discretion, notwithstanding the fact that you have well-founded fear, because you could have applied in one of those other countries. This is a very tricky determination to make, because one, you open yourself up to review by the Board of Immigration Appeals or a circuit court who says, you found that this person was being persecuted and yet you're denying their application. How heartless can you be? Or in a funny example, a number of years ago, when Todd was a reporter, he actually wrote about a case that I handled, and he didn't put it in quite those terms, but it's quite all right. And by the way, we only found that out incidentally after we met. But you always run the risk that you're going to be the poor government employee who makes a decision that gets thrust out there on the front page. And you don't have the ability to defend yourself. As an employee of the Department of Justice, which immigration judges are, you can't say, but wait, I've got a statement to make, because EOR, the Executive Office for Immigration Review, which includes the immigration courts, will say, we don't comment publicly on cases. Well, you can imagine what the story is that comes out of that. But the point that Mark makes is an important one. Once people are in the United States, if they're third country nationals, if they're from other than Mexico, we're sort of dependent upon the Mexican government or whatever other country, Colombia in the case of the country report, to take those people back so that they can return to or make an asylum claim in that country. So one way that we could address this issue is through legislation and make it clear that any individual who passes through a country that grants asylum or refugee status, and these are all nationally known countries, internationally known, because you have to be subject to an agreement, is not eligible to apply for asylum in the United States. We have a safe third country agreement with Canada. Canada actually does a very good job of keeping people that they don't want in Canada out of Canada. Air Canada is a national flag carrier. It has a relationship with the Canadian government. There are not many boats that people get on that take them to Vancouver or that will take them to Prince Edward Island or New Brunswick. So most of the people that go to Canada come from the United States. We entered into an agreement with the Canadians to say, hey, anybody who ends up in Canada, if they come to the United States, we're going to send them back to apply. Anybody that ends up in the United States, we're going to, that goes to Canada, you can send them back. At the end of the day, it really only benefits Canada because the United States has open land borders. So we can enter into agreements with countries like that. The problem is, most countries aren't going to enter into an agreement to take people that they already allowed to pass through their territory.
Right. The guy behind you first.
Yeah, I'm Bill Bushka, an independent blogger, and I have ties to the gay community and also to some conservative news a lot of different contexts. I hear a lot about the moral obligation of people to help asylum seekers and refugees. They're often lumped together. As you know, that in California and Texas, there are a lot of religious groups, evangelical groups, and Catholic groups sheltering undocumented people, and they think it's a moral obligation of people to help do that, to share their wealth. There's also groups that want to parole people out of detention and find sponsors to do that. And there's a whole issue that the United States does not have a private sponsorship program for refugees the way Canada does, which indirectly could be applied to asylum seekers. How do you feel about some of these things? Groups, especially religious groups, are saying people have to do everything they can to help refugees and asylum seekers. Remember in 1980, the Mariel boat lift, when there was a lot of pressure for people to house Cuban refugees, and that was widely done back then. It didn't work out particularly well. How do you feel about that? What would you say to people about the morality of all of this? I'm trying to be as objective as I can.
Anybody want to take that?
I can take it. So it's inherent in our, all of our, I guess, our history and our national legislation regarding refugees and the asylum, I guess the nationality.
Immigration and Nationality.
Immigration and Nationality Act that an American value is to provide sanctuary for those who need it. And I would argue that there is a balancing act that has to be made there where we are able to uphold those values, to provide sanctuary to those who need it when we can determine who they are. And I think that's kind of the key in the post 9/11 period, that if we can improve vetting, if we can improve those processes, then that better enables us to provide sanctuary and to meet those values.
Yeah, and just to follow up on that, we're a secular country, but the granting of asylum takes on almost a religious tone in this country. Many of us came here. Many of us are the children, the grandchildren, the descendants of individuals who fled to this country seeking asylum in the forms that had existed in the past. And as a judge, and I don't want to speak for Mark, but the greatest thing that other than swearing in citizens, which is a power that immigration judges have, and which is really cool because everybody wants to get their picture taken with you, granting asylum is the greatest power that you have, because you truly put the cloak of the United States around this person and say you're not going to be harmed anymore. With respect to the moral issue of this, as Todd mentioned, if there's better vetting, we can separate the good cases from the bad. And let me explain to you why that's important. Bad cases in immigration law, or bad asylum cases, fraudulent cases, or cases that just don't have a basis, slow up the process for people who are in the United States and applying for asylum themselves. Once you get asylum, you can actually bring in people who are in your family, who are probably in trouble too because they're associated with you, into the United States. But the backlogs run on for years because so many bad cases are in the system. That's a moral issue. The other issue is that in many instances, bad cases seem to drive out good cases. There are people who will have facially valid claims of harm because there is a threat, and the threshold's pretty low. But so many people come into court thinking that they have to bolster their claims. I was beaten, they broke my bones, they hung me by my thumbs. And these aren't real examples, but I'm just giving you an idea that, it's difficult as a judge, it's possible, and most do, but to hear these horrible cases full of puffery, and then hear this other case of people came by, the government came by my house, they park out front, I'm a political opponent, I'm well known, and the fact is that they've made threats to me that I think they're going to act on. We don't have any of that, any of the puffery that exists in those other cases. And it's very difficult to say, this case, it passes the threshold, it's not high. You talked about the moral issue of
Go ahead.
You talked about the moral issue of parole, and that's an important point, and I'd like to just give a different perspective on that. If individuals know that when they come to the United States that they're going to get released, more people are going to attempt to enter the United States illegally and go around the extremely generous system. 20% of all the world's legal immigrants come to the United States. We accept more refugees than the rest of the world combined. Don't quote me on that. But when you encourage people to come to the United States illegally, those individuals subject themselves to the smugglers. Smugglers are god-awful people. I mean, it's difficult to think of a worse group of individuals than any individual that engages in smuggling. If you put yourself into the hands of an individual to bring you to the United States, if you're a woman, you're probably, there's a high, not you're probably, but there's a distinct possibility you're going to get raped. You're almost definitely going to get robbed. The possibility of being murdered is extremely high. And so when we encourage things, when we release individuals from custody, and I understand the impulse, but when we release individuals from custody before we have a full opportunity to vet them, we just encourage more people to go through that system. We might as well be advertising for the smugglers ourselves. So I understand the moral issue, and it's a strong one. And when I was a judge in a detained facility, and I would walk through the facility daily. And the COs knew me, and I knew them, and by and large, they were good people. But, if there was ever a complaint, they could bring it to me, and I would bring it to the captain, and everybody in that system wanted to make sure that everybody was treated well, because they had a government contract for one, but because inherently they were almost exclusively good people who didn't want to have anything bad happen and understood the weighty responsibility that they bore. So,
Let me,
anyway.
no, it's fine. Art has a unique perspective I think you need to hear, perhaps more than my own. In a non-detained setting in Miami has both going on. We have a detention center at Chrome and a detention center in Broward. So we have large calendars all over South Florida. And I'm not a judge anymore. I was at the downtown Miami courthouse. Just let me give you this. Judges are flesh and blood. And the old saying is that the heart bone is connected to the head bone. Is very true in the immigration setting. And I heard cases, you mentioned the gay community, I heard cases out of what we would call very macho countries, like Colombia, for instance, where there's a sort of a tradition of that, or so I was told during my hearings, and that these individuals needed to flee because gay men, in particular, are subjected to abuse. On its face, it was appeared to be a strong claim, and I heard the case over a period of 3 days, not 3 full days, but over a period of 3 days. And it later came out that a man who was 27 years old had never engaged in sex before and was offering up a case for membership in a particular social group, that of men. There wasn't enough information for me to conclude that the asylum claim had merit, and I turned it down. But it took 3 days, 3 separate hearings, a total of, I would say, probably 5 to 6 hours before I felt comfortable with making a decision, not necessarily in his favor, but in making a decision at all. And that type of consideration is true across all cases. Anywhere from 40 to 50% of asylum petitions or claims are granted on average. So we don't detain those people after they lose their cases, even though under the law we can. I don't know what the Trump administration is going to do, but and many of these people later disappear. Obviously, we have a great deal of confidence in the foreign-born, and it's built into our statutes. I want to give you something that Todd did, but I want to give you a particular example of it while I have a second here. This is not from a smuggler, but this is from a person who used a smuggler and then began to manufacture documents or obtain documents illegally once he arrived in Europe. And the follower is named Yahia, and it was Rabe Osman speaking to him. Spanish intelligence intercepted this on May 24th, 2004, and this is a direct quote from the intercept. Everything is permitted in the cause of jihad, including marrying with Christian women, because we need immigration papers. We have to be everywhere. In Germany, in Holland, in London. We are dominating Europe with our presence. The women serve to obtain documents because we are in favor of the cause of God. You have a grim determination to cause trouble once you get there, matched up with a profit motive from the smuggler, and it is a toxic mix for the West and for our values, because we don't like turning down people. We like granting relief. At least when I was a judge, I felt really comfortable about the cases I granted. But that's what we're dealing with. And it's no small matter for the United States to be put into a position where it has the contrived claims of smugglers and terrorists matched up very well together, and then entering the United States or Europe, and then doing what Mr. Bensman referred to as, I think he said, bloody mayhem, and it's all true.
Thank you, Mark. Let's take one last question so we can respect people's time.
Hi, thank you. To your point on the need for a better vetting system and the capacity of asylum officers and judges, I just was curious about why aren't there more calls to increase judges and asylum officers in this capacity? It seems to me that the backlogs, if you could cut to be, instead of a matter of years, a matter of days or weeks, it would be less of an incentive for people to game the system, as you guys are saying.
Well, the game system is correct, but I'm going to argue to you right now that a lot of this is self-inflicted. In 2008, you only had it was a large backlog. You only had 186,000 cases in backlog. Now you have 542,000 cases in backlog, and this is after 8 years of the Obama administration. They weren't trying cases. They were taking cases that they didn't think they could grant relief to and put them over into what was called administrative closure, hoping those cases might get stronger over time. Those cases still need to be brought back on an active calendar for the judges, all of them in non-detained settings, to start considering. The other thing the Obama administration had done prior to an earlier directive from one of the former chief judges by the name of Michael Creppy, was to allow people to change venues. And they were granting lots of venue changes to a city where the applicant wanted to be heard. Now, that slows down cases by a year. And you can believe that the smugglers also tell them, seek venue changes, because that will slow down your case, and you can build equities while you're here. Building equities is a term of art in the immigration court business, because you look at what has the person done since they got here. Those are the equities. That's one of the things they look at when granting lawful permanent residence, or granting a cancellation application. And cancellation is for non-permanent residents as well as lawful permanent residents. I see Art motioning at me, but we didn't have backlogs like this in 2008. We have them today. We have to deal with them. And you have in the pipeline more than just a little over 300 judges. By the time they're all on board, you should have somewhere in the neighborhood of about 350 judges, 330 judges that will be coming in to hear these cases.
Yeah, Attorney General Sessions has announced the hiring of 75 additional immigration judges. But again, 542,000 people, 75 additional judges. Some of those people will be in a supervisory capacity. Plainly, there's a need for more. One thing I will mention, though, is that judges don't come cheap. An immigration judge can get paid up to, I believe it's $171,000 a year, which is good if you're a judge. And, you know, in addition to that, you also get health insurance. You have a thrift savings plan, which is like a 401k. Costs a lot of money. With respect to asylum officers, USCIS is fee-based. Basically, it pays its own way based upon the money that it receives from the applications that are filed with it. However, there is no fee for a credible fear application, and there's no fee for an asylum application. So the fact is, you could have one asylum application or 500,000. The amount of money that comes into the agency is exactly the same. And for that reason, the agency, you know, provides resources where people are paying. You have a naturalization claim, we're going to, you know, move that out of the pipeline, especially since if you're applying for naturalization, you already have a green card, you already have a congressman that you can go complain to about why you don't have your citizenship yet. Same with marriage applications. You've got a United States citizen who's providing for you, that person votes. In many of these, in this particular situation, it's only events like this and, you know, hearings that Congress has that brings attention to this huge backlog of cases and the problem that exists. So, you know, the good part about USCIS is, and this was as of FY 2015, I think, they were sitting on $1.2 billion of money that they had accumulated in previous years that they hadn't spent yet. And there was a belief that maybe that was being saved for a potential amnesty so that they could ramp up quickly and then collect the fees back from those individuals. But that would be speculation. But the fact is, they could, you know, in light of what is an obvious emergency, they could use some of that money to hire additional asylum officers. And asylum officers are actually a bargain. Most of them are GS-12s. And get paid, you know, I think that they top out in the $80,000 range. So compared to an immigration judge, it's a pretty good deal. Just to give a plug for a blog that I did recently, I also proposed that perhaps, like the federal district courts, Article III judges, will have Article I magistrates who assist them in their jobs. Mark will tell you, a lot of the stuff that we did as judges doesn't require 3 years of law school and 20 years of practice to do. A lot of the people that came before me were people who had been caught drunk driving, who had been arrested because they had engaged in spousal abuse, and they would come and ask for bond. Took up a huge part of my calendar. But the fact is, I'm no more likely to know whether somebody's going to drunk drive again than anybody sitting in this room or most of the people that you're going to grab on the street outside. So, you know, there are some fine points in immigration law. It's a very complicated system in certain instances that plainly require, you know, years of legal study and, you know, lots of training. But there are plenty of situations that, quite frankly, could be done by somebody a lot cheaper. Save the government money, we could hire more of. So anyway.
Todd had some comments, and then we're going to wrap it up. Todd?
Yeah, to your question. So none of this is really a secret, that there are capacity problems with USCIS, major capacity problems. In fact, I would argue that USCIS, in order to fix this problem, needs to be a top-to-bottom reformation. It needs to be reformed and it needs to be expanded to be able to address not just the asylum fraud detection problem, but also to convert to intelligence collection, because they're in a unique position to be able to collect during their interviews and to do something with that intelligence collection. But Art mentioned in his research paper and also today about some GAO reporting. And he mentioned, and the GAO has been issuing alarms about this for years. Okay. This is a December 2015 report. Very interesting reading, and I'll just tell you one thing that that really stood out for me in terms of process and capacity is that U.S. attorneys' offices across the 8 districts that USCIS will not prosecute, they're not inclined to prosecute asylum fraud at all. And this report provides the statistics showing that U.S. Attorney's Office won't prosecute asylum fraud cases very often, very rarely. The trickle down to that is that in the asylum, in the ICE, HSI offices that investigate this, they're not going to bother sending referrals or doing investigations. There's a disincentive for them. Nobody wants to spend 2 years investigating a case that the U.S. Addy is going to turn down. So that is a systemic problem with this whole issue, is just simply detection on the bottom end, at the mid-level investigation, and at the top of the food chain prosecution. None of that is happening in the area that we're addressing today. And it's really stark in not just this GAO report, but prior GAO reports about the same problem. I think there was one in 2008 that surveyed asylum officers, and 70% of them or 80% of them said that they were pretty sure that they've given credible fear to people that they weren't sure about. They just did it, pushed them through.
Thank you, Todd. I want to respect people's time, and we're going to wrap it up. Thank you, Art and Mark. Our speakers, I'm pretty sure, are available to be accosted by you afterwards if you all have more accosting you want to do. But I want to thank our speakers and thank all of you. And the transcript and video of this will be up on our website in a few days. The reports that we published by Art and Mark are on our website at cis.org. And thanks for coming.